everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Well, Tony, this is yet another of our Oregon rewatch shows, and we'd like to have a little bit of something for everyone. So I think this is going to make Ohio State and Oregon fans both equally happy and equally upset, which is good. That's, I think, a nice balance in the show, because we're going to be talking about the Oregon offense, which will make the Oregon fans very happy, and we're going to be talking about the Oregon defense, which, oh boy, if you can't control Penn State's wide receiver core, I have bad news about what's coming in Pasadena. Holy Moses.
Yeah, it was not good, and pretty much everybody probably already saw the Big Ten championship game shootout, 45-37 for Oregon, a game that was 28-10 at one point in the second quarter, and you're thinking, maybe Oregon just kind of let up. And I don't know if I subscribe to that theory, because they really, really got run on in this one. And they also, Drew Aller was able to throw when he was accurate, that is. And sometimes when he was accurate, he also, the receivers would drop passes, and there are some fortunate circumstances there for Oregon. And other fortunate circumstances for Oregon, which we will touch on. But Tom, I will let you go first in terms of, as we go back and forth and sharing what we learned from this game.
Sure. So I think the first thing for me, let's make our visitors from Oregon happy. Let's talk about Tez Johnson, because boy, the Oregon offense with Tez Johnson looks so different than the Oregon offense without Tez Johnson. There was a play where it was close to the goal line. I don't remember. I think he might have scored on it, but it was the only thing I could comp him to is, do you remember The Matrix when like Neo is like fighting the agents and he's just, they're firing bullets at him and he's just kind of like effortlessly dodging him and like looking bored while he does it. And Tez Johnson just looks, he's so fast, but then it's just so effortless. And he just bends and moves and dodges in a way that's like, this is like AI, right? Like this is not possibly like real, honest to goodness video of a person playing football at a high level against a good opponent. 11 catches, 181 yards, only one touchdown, Tony. Really disappointing day for him. But yeah, if you're going to catch 11 balls and do it for like 17 yards and change per reception, with a bunch of them being throws right close to the line of scrimmage where he got tackled right away, like he had a bunch of zeros and ones and threes in that, and then also had 48 and 30 and that kind of stuff. He is just so explosive for Oregon out of the slot, and that's going to be one of the big positional things that Ohio State's going to have to figure out. How do you defend him and not let him do what he did to Penn State?
Yeah, and I think this was his most explosive game of the season. It was certainly his best output. It tied his season high. Actually, the season high is 12 catches, but he's had 11 one other time. The 181 yards was by far his season high. The next highest was 121 against UCLA. And I remember talking about him as we were doing the first preview back in October, talking about how a lot of his stuff is just short gains. And we discussed his 10 catches for 84 yards the week before against Michigan State. He caught 7 passes for 75 yards against Ohio State with 1 touchdown. I think the Buckeyes would take that right now in terms of if you can hold him to 10, 11 yards on average, great. The game after that, it was at Purdue, 7 catches for 66 yards. The game after that was Illinois, 6 for 102. You really want to keep him in that 8 to 12 yard range, because once he starts getting above that, then that means he's hit something big and he's been consistently gaining yards. And man, you talk about the need to tackle this guy, because one guy can't do it. It looks like it's not even JV versus varsity. It's like JV versus the NFL. It's like pros versus Joes, that old show where just random people off the street were trying to tackle Jerry Rice and Bo Jackson and stuff. This is ill-advised to try and, because every time he just makes one guy miss. He is so quick, and he's got really good vision. And it's not like he's just going side to side and getting tackled. He's going side to side and then getting upfield. Like he's moving forward as he's moving sideways, and going to be a very difficult task for Jordan Hancock. But as Ryan Day, the coaches, talk about, there is a point of reference now for almost everybody on this Ohio State team in terms of who they are facing, what they are facing. So Jordan Hancock and whoever else gets matched up against Tez Johnson will at least have that frame of reference. I thought one of the other aspects from the Penn State defense that failed them is they lost leverage a lot in the first quarter against the run and the pass and the short passing game. And you can credit like guys like Terrence Ferguson blocking the offensive line, locking up the Penn State defense and just sealing them off. And there was never enough defenders for Penn State against Oregon with the running or the passing. And there was a lot of free run before there would actually be any hitting of say Jordan James or Noah Whittington. Like they got some yards against Penn State, but not a lot. But early on, they were getting some chunks, and Penn State just couldn't get that leverage back. And then they finally adjusted and made things more difficult for Oregon. But early on, they were kind of, I think, dicing up that Penn State defense to the tune of, as I said, a 28-10 lead in the second quarter.
And Oregon ran the ball a ton in this game. Jordan James had 20 carries for 87 yards, which, 4.3 yards per carry. That's not incredible or anything, but it's fine if Jordan James runs for 4.3 yards per carry against Ohio State, they'd probably take that, especially if he tacks on the 2 touchdowns that he did against Penn State. Noah Whittington, though, 15 for 82, 5.5 yards per carry. He's, I think, been banged up, and we haven't seen as much of him this year as we have of James. It looks like he may be healthy now, and that gives them just a whole nother dynamic just to get outside and just a little bit of a speed back, a little bit of a power back. And those guys are also really good in the pass game. Jordan James, 3 catches, 20 yards. Noah Whittington only had 1 catch, but it's another threat out of the backfield. Just another weapon for Dylan Gabriel to throw the ball to, in addition to handing the ball to them. And, another guy who we have seen them hand the ball to, but also throw the ball to with increasing frequency as we've been watching through this Oregon season is Kenyon Sadiq. We've talked a bunch about Terrence Ferguson and how good he is. And he had another monster game. He was 3 for 30, but a touchdown. But Kenyon Sadiq, 2 catches, 30 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns for the tight end. I don't know that I've seen 3 touchdowns for a tight end for Ohio State since maybe the Clemson Sugar Bowl. That might be the last time. But Kenyon Sadiq is another guy who just the athleticism. They both present such different challenges. Ferguson's just real big, but they throw it to him down the field much more than you'd think from just big tight end. Kenyon Sadiq is just fast. He is real fast, real athletic. We've talked on the last show about him getting the ball, just being handed the ball in motion, just sort of on an end around. This one, 2 touchdowns on the first 2 drives, including him hurdling a defensive back on the first one. It's just, they just keep throwing guys at you, and they're all a little bit different. And it's not just, well, if you can stop this guy, then you can definitely stop that guy. I was trying to figure out, when you're looking at Kenyon Sadiq, is that Sonny Styles' problem to figure that out in space? Like, how's Ohio State? You talked about, Jordan Hancock, the sort of nickel, being the guy who has to figure out Tez Johnson. Who has to figure out Kenyon Sadiq for Ohio State?
Yeah, is it Sonny? Is it Lathan Ransom? How do they want to do that? And it's interesting because I watch Kenyon Sadiq and the things that the way he looks and the things that he does, my mind goes to Xavier Johnson. And I know he's like listed like 6'3", 230, but he can do different things. He can line up in the slot and run like a receiver. He can line up in the backfield, take a swing pass or whatever you kind of need. And is just if you need somebody right here, we can put him there and go with that. And he's not just a placeholder. He can do something. And it's not like he's put up big numbers. He did score twice in this game, but he is just another piece, and it's a valuable piece. And if you want to go ahead and focus on him, then somebody else is going to be open. And I don't think anybody's really going to focus on him, but you better be aware of him because he has made some teams pay. And to me, he's a guy that could be a lot more productive if they needed him to be or wanted him to be, but they don't necessarily just overfeed anybody. And if you're going to overfeed somebody in this lineup, it's going to be Tez Johnson based on what he can do after the catch. In this one, there was also like, he's getting open downfield and intermediate and like wide open at times, which I guess let's just take us to this next point, because his touchdown catch gets wide open downfield, and there is 2 Oregon offensive linemen 5 yards downfield that they didn't call. And we're contrasting this with just watching the Washington game where the refs did actually get an eligible man downfield by about a yard or so, 1 or 2 yards. This one was a full 5 yards. It was 3rd and 10 maybe, or it was whatever and 10. And at least one of the linemen was halfway to the first down marker. So they were 5 yards downfield, and nobody saw it. Nobody called it. And that led to a touchdown on that one, I believe. And another one, there was a receiver who pushed off on a catch, and it's just ironic to me that was not called. It was Terrence Ferguson, I think, on a route, kind of pushes off a little bit, extends his arm. That's all it takes, right? And gets free and gets a catch. And you contrast that with Jeremiah Smith getting flagged for that and really devastating the Buckeyes in the Oregon game. So those are just 2 of the calls. The refs didn't cost this game. Because you can blame James Franklin if you want as well.
We'll get there. Don't worry. We'll get there.
But some questionable calls in this one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is, for Oregon folks who may be new to the Big Ten and some of its various quirks among its various fan bases, Penn State fans have been 100% convinced for the last 30 years that there is a massive anti-Penn State Big Ten conspiracy, and everyone just kind of laughs at it. It's like every time a bad call goes against them, it's like, well, obviously, you know what this is all about, right? And that game was the first time I was kind of like, well, maybe they have a point. There were 5 penalties against Penn State in the first 18 minutes for 65 yards. Some of them were legitimate. There was a unnecessary roughness on a kickoff and a touchback, and Gary Danielson's like, oh, there it is, and they circles the wrong guy. And I went back and watched. I'm watching the guy they called the penalty on. It's like, no, that doesn't look like anything. Had an unnecessary roughness on a Penn State offensive lineman, which, like, whatever, that's fine. Call whatever you're going to call. But then there was one later where Bryce Betcher committed like a really obvious unnecessary roughness penalty right in the middle, he was tackling the ball carrier. There's a whistle. It's like a couple seconds, and then he throws him to the ground, and then he doesn't get called. And it's like, well, you don't want to call that because you don't want to make that kind of an impact in the game. I'm like, well, the 65 yards earlier, did that not impact the game at all? And again, this is not why Oregon won. And there was one later where there was, with like 5 minutes left, there was a catch that was like, this was a catch. And they were like, no, incomplete. And they showed the replay on TV, and the rules guys like, yeah, man, that's a catch. Like, there's not even a question that's a catch. And James Franklin, game management. Well, we're going to smooth transition to James Franklin, game management. Why did you not pause for a second and let them review the very obvious catch that you were yelling at the officials that it was a very obvious catch? You control the tempo of the game, my dude. Like, what are we doing here? So, all right, let's talk James Franklin, game management. Speaking of long-term game, Big Ten tropes, I understand the theory behind going for 2 earlier than you probably need to. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. But that felt a little bit like, Dan Lanning is, well, the other boy has a balloon and he gets to do fun things on, going for 2 points earlier in the game. And everyone thinks he's fun and smart when he does it. I'm going to do it too. And then they didn't get it. There was something else. There was another absolutely, like, he used his timeouts correctly, I thought, which was good. That was, a pleasant surprise. There was something else. Now I'm not remembering what it was. Did you have any other James Franklin notes other than the 2-point conversion? And
well, I mean, the whole tempo on what was a catch, it was called incomplete, and Penn State thought it was a first down, which it would have been, but instead it's a 2nd and 10, and they're running tempo. And tempo was effective throughout this game. We could talk about that in a bit. But This was the first time I've ever seen the team that could benefit from replay running tempo to avoid replay. This was a complete buffoonery that we witnessed. And then for James Franklin to be angry at the refs as you said, like, you control the tempo, and they sure did. And they're like, oh no, let's not let replay look at this. I never didn't understand any of that. Why didn't anybody say, whoa, 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 let's back off? Did you not check the down and distance? Did you not see the ref saying this? Did you not see where the ball was placed? How do you think that's a first down when you have not moved forward? It was a complete failure on everybody in the coaching staff. It's a complete failure on Drew Aller's part to not be like, hey, let's, and it's for the receiver to say, I caught this, hold up. Like, everybody failed. They just immediately like, tempo, okay, we got to hurry, turn off that last play, turn on the next play. And they went, and they, it cost them the game. I'm not saying it didn't, but I don't know if it did or not, but it was, no, they eventually picked up the first down.
Yeah, they picked up the first down. Yeah.
But that's just part and parcel with the James Franklin gang.
Yeah. And it wasn't, it was an incomplete pass, so the clock was stopped. So it wasn't that they were trying to save time. I think the only thing I could come up with was they were running tempo. They didn't want to let Oregon swap out because, as you said, they ran tempo with great effect. There was the last game we watched was the Washington game, and it was like Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell were just absolutely dominated that game. You could not go one play without seeing them. And then this game, the only time I remember seeing Jamari Caldwell this game was when Penn State's running tempo, and he's on the sidelines sucking wind, like like when they used to have like oxygen on the sidelines for the players. I was like, man, my dude thinks this game is at altitude. It is like Indianapolis is, I don't know, 1,000 feet over sea level or something like that. Jamari Caldwell was like not built for that, not built for tempo in this game. And you saw them be able to use that, trap the Oregon defensive lineman on the field, use tempo, keep pounding. That was one of the big reasons why, Washington couldn't run the ball up the middle. Penn State, between the tackles, that was like, here's the express lane. Help yourself to 12 yards, Nick Singleton. Help yourself to 12 yards. Even Drew Aller, who's not exactly the biggest runner in the game. There was one where Drew Aller took one just right up the middle. There was some pressure, but Oregon kind of lost their rush discipline and left a lane up the middle. And Drew Aller's like running, and he runs past a guy who's blocking for him. And then he's like kind of bracing himself for a hit, and he's looking around. He's like, oh, no, there's no one here. I can keep running. That was the one where he like fell down and got a stinger or something. But it was like, he's like, well, certainly there must be the clock in your head. Certainly there must be an Oregon defender here now. Nope. Just keep on running. Oregon, this was, let's see, Penn State finished the game with 35 carries for 292 yards. They ran the ball 35 times and averaged 8.3 yards per carry. 8.3. That is nuts. They gave up a run of 32 yards to Katron Allen, 41 yards to Nick Singleton. I don't know that Ohio State's given up two runs that long all season. That was a game where it's like Oregon won the Big Ten championship and the offense looked absolutely unstoppable. And you still came away from it going like, you might have a problem there because, and we can get into some of the Oregon statistics later and where they stand on defense compared to Ohio State. And the most interesting tab for me, Tony, on CFBstats.com was versus ranked opponents. And boy, we have some outlier stats there that we'll get to a little later on in the show.
This was just such a contrast coming off of the Washington game where you're watching this Oregon defensive line, you're thinking this is the best defensive line Ohio State has faced. And then you watch them in this game and you're like, where's the defensive line? I mean, so many guys we talked about against Washington, and here there's really not a lot to talk about. As you said, Jamari Caldwell, didn't see much of him, didn't see much from him. Derek Harmon had a sack, but I think that was maybe a coverage sack if I remember correctly. All of the guys that we've talked about, I'm just scrolling down here for Mateo Uyunglele, and I don't even know if did he even play in this game because
played. I'm sure I saw him on the field at one point. I think he had a. Did he have? I think he had one where he was trying to grab onto a Penn State running back or something out in the flat,
right?
And like pulled something off the back of him, but he didn't actually get him down. So he was out there. He just didn't do anything. And
the reason I ask is because he's not in the stat sheet. Like there's no tackles, there's no anything like that, and that was indicative of the defensive performance on the front. And linebackers are missing some tackles as well because again, Penn State's running backs are very good, but Katron Allen, 124 yards on 14 carries. Nick Singleton, 105 on 10. And then Drew Aller, 54 yards on 5 rushes. He was, and it was Bo Pribula who was sacked. So that gives you even a better idea of how well Drew Aller was doing. But that's like 19 carries between their top 3 guys for about 183 yards. So you're talking over 9 yards a carry there. And they were only one of those 19 carries was stopped in the backfield, and that was a loss of 1. So this Penn State offensive line was winning consistently, and really, really Singleton, Katron Allen running well outside the tackles, inside the tackles. I think one of the springboards to all of this was the effective read option that Drew Aller was running, and he was freezing the lineman, and then he'd make the right read throughout this game, and it was effective. And then when he needed to keep it, he would. And he had a 22-yard rush on I think that was the one up the middle, I believe.
Yeah.
But he had other effective runs in this one, and you look at this and how much of this can Ohio State replicate? Well, they've got 2 good running backs. They've got a quarterback as mobile as Drew Aller, who is run to read option and is comfortable doing that. And we know Ohio State has that as part of the plan. Now, do they have the same offensive line or the same offensive line capabilities as Penn State? I mean, maybe. Do they have a better passing attack? Yeah. Drew Aller, 20 of 39, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Made some really nice throws, but as we know, you can't expect him to do that every time, or even 80% of the time. He's going to give some away. He's going to make some bad throws. Tyler Warren, their All-American tight end, had a drop that was a perfect throw right in the bucket. Right, I think that was early in the game that he kind of dropped it. But overall, over 500 yards of total offense, and I think 7 or 8 yards of play for Penn State. Plenty good enough to win, but as we know, this Oregon offense is really outstanding when it wants to be, and Penn State's offense gave them everything that they could take.
For sure. And what was jarring to me about watching Penn State run for that kind of yardage against Oregon was we've seen Penn State's offense in person. Katron Allen versus Ohio State in Beaver Stadium at home on a perfectly lovely day. 12 carries, 27 yards, long of 7, 2.2 yards per carry. Nick Singleton, 6 carries, 15 yards, long of 4. 6 carries, long of 4, 2.5 yards per carry. Like this was and Drew Aller had 10 carries for 31 yards in that game. Tyler Warren had 3 for 47. He had a long of 33 right at the end of the game. Before that, I mean, they had, you take the one long run by Tyler Warren out of there, and it's 31 carries for 31 carries for, I can do math, 87 yards. That's on average. You ran it 31 times, and that's less than 3 yards a carry. That's incredibly bad. Long carry all day, other than the Warren carry, was 14 from Drew Aller. And that's the same offense it wasn't like it was a windy day and you could really sit on the run, or it was rainy and sloppy. It was fine. It was sunny. It was relatively warm. It was, early-ish in the season, late. It was Halloween weekend, something like that. There was really no problem there other than Penn State, the offensive line, could get no lanes against the Ohio State defensive line. So to see what is not an amazing offensive line open up that kind of holes against Oregon is like, oof, that's, I think it's certainly a concern for Oregon. And, I think that game coupled with the Ohio State-Tennessee game is probably why you see the number 8 seed as a, 2-point or whatever it is now favorite over the 1 seed, which is a whole separate statement on the committee and the ranking process and all that kind of stuff. But, we do these shows. We've done these shows a bunch of times before. And there are the games where your team looks absolutely unbeatable. And there are games where it looks like your team couldn't beat Eastern Washington. Even if you're playing at home and your eyes aren't bleeding from the field, you couldn't beat Eastern Washington at home. And the truth always lies somewhere in between. And we've obviously seen these two teams play each other in person, live and in living color in Eugene. And Oregon didn't have Jordan Burch in that game. And so this is going to be a different challenge, but this was a game that I can't imagine Oregon fans came away feeling like great about things after that game. because the offense was fun. It was a really exciting, fun game. But woo boy, I have concerns there. One other area where I keep writing the same name down, and it's always just like one play, two plays, something like that. Johnny Cornelius, the right tackle for Oregon, and he's someone who Ohio State fans will probably remember from when he was in the transfer portal, headed out from Rhode Island. The Buckeyes were looking at him as a possibility, and Oregon ended up getting him. He gave up a sack in the first quarter, and then you kept seeing like really obvious holding on the end, and it didn't get called, but it was to the point where, on the broadcast, they're talking about like, hey, he's getting away with some really obvious holding here. That's going to get called at some point, you would certainly assume. And yeah, Oregon's got a better offense than a lot of the teams Ohio State's played, and getting behind the sticks isn't necessarily a death sentence to your current drive the way it could be for other teams that Ohio State's played. But if you're in 1st and 20 or 2nd and 16 or something like that, this is going to be the best defense Oregon's faced all season. So you're not going to want to do that. And we just watched Jack Sawyer absolutely eat a right tackle's lunch in the Tennessee game. And we spent the whole week leading up to that game looking at these Tennessee games and going, boy, I have questions about the right tackle for Tennessee. Tony, I have questions about the right tackle for Oregon.
And that sack he gave up was to a backup defensive end for Penn State, who is now rotating in. And then you mentioned at least one of the missed holding calls later in the game. That was, I think it was the same drive or the same play that Terrence Ferguson pushed off. And so like there's no call there. So I'm sure that whole drive was driving Penn State fans insane. And that push off was a 4th down play. And I think the non-call hold on Abdul Carter, I can't remember. My notes are a mess. I can't remember if it's the same play or not, but it's in that same drive. At least it's in the same line of my notes. So that's pretty accurate. And yeah, he got away with that one. And that's going to be one. Yeah. You keep trying to see these patterns develop, and they're going to need Josh Conerly and Johnny Cornelius are going to need to play their best game and not let Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry and Mitchell Melton create the kind of situation, the bad situation that they did for Nico Iamaleava against Tennessee. But with the run defense, Tom, this is the 3rd time now that Oregon has given up over 200 yards rushing. They did it to Boise State, no shade there. Did it to Purdue in a 35-0 win. This does not even compute. And then, of course, the 35 for 292 against Penn State, which absolutely does compute because that's a talented front, a talented group of running backs and skill position. I'm not saying Ohio State's going to run for 292 yards. They haven't done it in forever. So, but it gives you a lot of, if you're Ohio State watching this, if you're Ohio State fans watching that game, there's no doubt in your mind. Well, for the few of them that were watching the game, because at that point, football had ceased to exist and who wanted to be reminded of the previous week. But if you didn't come away from that game thinking, gosh, if Ohio State could get another crack at Oregon, maybe something good could happen. Now, the week before that, they held Washington to 43 yards rushing. They held Maryland to 81 yards rushing, Michigan State to 59, but those are not running teams. Ohio State can be a running team if they really, really want to and execute. And they've got all of the ingredients, but do they have the chef to put it all together? So, let's see, Tom. Again, I've got so many notes about how quiet the defensive line was. I couldn't believe it. And I guess you look at the numbers and you absolutely can. They cannot be that quiet. They cannot be, Jordan Birch set the tone. Derek Harmon, these guys dominated against Washington, and they were nowhere to be seen against Penn State. Drew Aller had time to throw. If only he had receivers to throw to, and if only he had the consistent accuracy that Will Howard has shown. If Will Howard gets the time to throw that Drew Aller did, you might see another 45 points or whatever put up on the board for the Buckeyes.
Well, and I think everyone is going to be tempted to say, okay, everyone bet the over because Oregon's offense is really good and Ohio State's offense is really good. And typically when you see teams play for the second time, the score tends to go down. That's sort of a general historical trend. So that's the only thing right now that in my head, I'm thinking, and I'm not thinking like, the last time we were out at the Rose Bowl, we watched Ohio State and Utah play a game where I think the losing team had 40 points. So you're telling me we can't see that again? Like, we could certainly see that again. That even though there was not anything, national championship wise on the line, that was a hell of a football game. That was one of my favorite games I've seen in person, just in terms of like just two teams just swinging at each other the whole game. That was a lot of fun. I would take another one of those right now, another 40, 80 whatever points combined in a game that comes down to the final minute. But, I think when I look at Oregon, when we do these, we're not trying to just pat you on the head and tell you, here's where you're great. Like, there's lots of places Oregon's great. Our whole last show was just saying like, Oregon football, wow, that's amazing. And such pretty costumes. That was the whole last show. So when we're saying bad things about your team now, like, we're sorry, but that's part of the conversation. Like, part of this is figuring out where are the potential weaknesses. Both Ohio State and Oregon have played 4 games against ranked teams. Ohio State, in terms of points per game allowed, Ohio State, 19.3 points per game allowed against the 4 ranked teams they've played, 4th in the nation. Oregon, 27.8 points per game allowed, 26th in the nation. Yards per rush. Let's do yards per pass first, Tony. We'll save the jaw dropper for last. Yards per pass. Oregon is 5.8 yards per attempt. That's 9th in the country. Ohio State 6.4 yards per attempt. That's 14th in the country. So, passing Oregon's slightly better. Scoring Ohio State's better by like a touchdown. Nothing out of the ordinary right now. Yards per carry, Tony. Ohio State allows 3.57 yards per carry, 18th in the country against ranked teams. Oregon, and part of this is skewed by the fact that we just talked about how Penn State ran against them, but Ashton Jeanty and Boise State ran against them like this, and this has happened to them a couple times. 5.91 yards per carry, 93rd in the country against ranked opponents. When you're looking at a game like this, I start and say, okay, one team's offense, one team's defense, second team's offense, second team's defense. Which is the worst unit on the field? And if you're just looking at that, I think there's a pretty decent argument for Oregon's defense as the worst unit on the field. Doesn't mean they're bad. There's a bunch of statistical categories where they're still among the best in the nation. But in the weakest of those 4 units, I think there's an argument to be made that it's Oregon's defense. And that's something that, again, it's 4 games. It's not this is not a huge sample. It's skewed a little bit by the fact that they just got their faces kicked in by Penn State's offense for 4 quarters. But that, I think I'm looking at that and I'm going, huh.
The ability for Ohio State to run is that's going to make it whether Ohio State wins by multiple scores or they're in a dogfight, because if you get the run going, that just leads to more passing. And if you're bringing too many guys or enough guys that you need to stop the run, then you go over the top. And if they're not going to bring in enough guys to stop the run, then enjoy watching Ohio State run the ball, because they will. They learned their lesson. Ohio State learned their lesson against Michigan, and they came out throwing the ball against Tennessee, and it led to a lot of points. Whatever it takes in this one, you'll do the same thing. But it's hard not to be clouded by that Penn State game, and Oregon's going to do what they can do to remedy that and shore that up. But that's going to paint a lot of the picture for Ohio State's thoughts right now. Now, what's the game plan? We'll see. I only have a couple more things. I'd say the Penn State did a good job getting the matchups for Nick Singleton and Tyler Warren the way they wanted in the passing game. They move those guys around. As we know, Andy Kotelnicki moves everybody around at all times. And they even had the one that I'd forgotten about, where they basically put Tyler Warren at right tackle, but he was eligible. Mm-hmm. And Drew Aller missed him. That was another bad miss that could have been something more. And too many of the bad misses added up in this one. I thought it was interesting the way they were blitzing from the slot. Penn State was blitzing from the slot, forcing the quick throw to Drew from Dylan Gabriel, and then basically the defense knowing where the pass was going to go because of the blitz, vacates that area, so the throw is going to go right there, and then the safety comes up and blows it up. It was basically manipulating the throw. Now, I would caution Ohio State about becoming too presumptuous on where a throw is going to go at the snap, because as we've seen previously, Oregon may not go over the top on anybody else, but they will against you. So you may expect this same thing to happen for you, but don't be surprised when there's a pump and a go or something like that. So just be careful with presumption, because it got them killed the last time.
Yeah, and I've already recorded the show about Ohio State's offense against Tennessee with Ross Fulton, who's our X's and O's guy. That'll go up in a day or so. But one of the things that he talked about is Tennessee started the game by going, well, Michigan did this and it worked against Ohio State, so I bet it'll work for us. And spoiler alert, nope. Because you have time to look at, okay, what did the other team do? Okay, how do we counterpunch that? And then you assume that the other team is probably going to go, well, exactly what Tennessee did. Well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it. I'm sure it'll work again. And then when you counterpunch, then okay, now we're going to go to a split safety look. And then it's just kind of a back and forth cat and mouse thing. But yeah, what worked in Eugene in early October for either team is not necessarily what's going to work in Pasadena when they meet again in January. So that's just a general point that is going to cover a couple different, basically every game you watch, if you ever watch a team playing someone they've already faced. One other thing, you mentioned Penn State using the running backs out of the backfield at one point, but I just watched Nick Singleton just blaze past Jeffrey Bassa, the Penn State or the Oregon linebacker, and it was just like, okay, Oregon, don't listen. Travion Henderson, hello. That was just like, you could see that maybe being something that works for Ohio State, because they've worked Travion Henderson in there quite a bit in the past game over the last few weeks, and really throughout the season, but especially the last few weeks. That is something that I think you might see that. And then the last thing I had, Tony, was I wrote down Dante Moore in the game early. Now that they've preserved his red shirt, expect to see him. And we saw him for one play, and it did not go well. And, with Dylan Gabriel in there, just going up and down the field and up and down and up and down and up and down, like there was no real reason to mix it up. But I would not be remotely surprised to have a Dante Moore package of some kind for the Rose Bowl. And, if they bog down, we've seen Michigan do this in the past with, okay, stuff is bogging down with J.J. McCarthy or Davis Warren. Okay, we're going to put in the Alex Orji package. And, maybe there's a Dante Moore package that, that gets worked in for Oregon against Ohio State. And Dante Moore has one advantage over Alex Orji in that he can throw the football down the field. So it would be potentially a bigger danger for Ohio State. I don't know that he does anything so much exceptionally better than Dylan Gabriel does. It might be a quarterback run package just to save some hits on Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, he's a guy that you can't just assume is going to do one thing, because he can do whatever. But again, he's still a young guy, and it's a big situation to put him in. And I wouldn't expect Ohio State to just sit back and if he's in there, maybe create some chaos. One last thing, we talked the last game about how the corners for Oregon, you can go ahead and attack them and see what happens. Nico Reed gave up a touchdown in this one, but then also made the interception to seal the game on a terrible, terrible decision by Drew Aller to throw the ball downfield on 2nd and 1 late in the game when you're trying to drive. You are successfully driving down the field. You're able to run. There was no need for a deep shot that got intercepted. Really nice interception on Reed's part, but unnecessary throw by Aller. And that's kind of the story of Aller's career, where there's so much good there. You see so much potential, but then too often it comes crashing down to earth. But then also, that is the story of Penn State quarterbacks since ever, basically, as far as
Kerry
I've ever
Collins.
watched them. Yeah, right. The post Kerry Collins has been that way, where you get so much, but then they take it all away. Like Anthony Morelli can make every throw, and sometimes he throws through a window, and not a football window, like a bus window. So Tom, anything else?
No, I'm just enjoying the idea of Anthony Morelli. Yeah, man, that was a moment in time for sure. Yeah, he can make all the throws, even the bad ones.
He can make all the throws, country and Western. All right, that will do it. If you want to go ahead and hit the bell to be notified, hit the thumbs up. We would appreciate that as well. Just subscribe to the channel. That way you will get notified when we drop videos like this one or go live, and all of our other coverage that we have coming for the Rose Bowl. We will be headed out there in a matter of days. Looking forward to it. High 60s, low 70s, Tom. And of course, you can also find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. First month is $4.99. Sign up. Check us out there on the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, where we are talking about this game, talking about the portal, talking about recruiting, talking about the present and the future all at once. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.